Love it. Love it. Live. Wait for a little bit of real piece of grab. Cut off. Cecil and I came up with a new podcast that we're going to do, number 450.
I was about to say, like, which number?
The title's going to be Nobody Cares What I Think.
Yeah.
Or no, it was Nobody Wants to Hear What I Think.
Okay.
Welcome to Nobody Wants to Hear What I Think. But that's why I bring you on, Chris, so people can hear what somebody else thinks. All right, let's go live. Will Taysom Hill save our fantasy teams? That more this week on the couch. Chris Allen, will Taysom Hill be able to save our fantasy teams this year?
I don't know if he'll be able to save your fantasy teams, but he'll at least help your fantasy teams put up a good fight. I know that they have, it feels like a short week, right? Since they have the Thursday night game, but remember, since they wound up playing on Thanksgiving, they have had a full week. But even hearing now about Amari Cooper still not feeling well.
Yeah.
We'll see. But Zeke's supposed to get a big load or something like that. Kind of a poorly
serious load, not a lighthearted load, a serious load.
It was just like an oddly worded thing from Jerry Jones. But we'll see what the Cowboys offense wants to do. But looking at Taysom Hill, even in the short stints that New Orleans was bringing him in after he came back from that nasty concussion that he had earlier in the season, he was providing at least the spark for the offense. But I do think that there was some prudence in Sean Payton kind of reeling him back in, not really trying to see what they had in Trevor Siemian, even though at this point in Siemian's career, like, we know what he is as a passer. And I'm sure that Cecil could probably lend at least enough background info on Siemian from his time in Denver. But looking at Dallas's offense, like, while they have played, like, they have had some of those like big turnovers, whether it's from, Micah Parsons, like tracking down Patrick Mahomes, or even Trayvon Diggs, like having some of those big plays and interceptions. They have given up like 250 yards passing in the past, like 3 straight games. That some of that was likely aided from Patrick Mahomes, but still, like, their secondary has given up enough that Taysom Hill, with his deep passing, also with his rushing, I think when they played against, when Dallas played against Philly in their first matchup, Jalen Hurts tagged them for about like 35 yards on the ground. So it's like there's enough there for us to talk ourselves into Hill being worthwhile as a viable starter, because who else are you going to look for on the waiver wire? It looks kind of gross.
Yeah, it is.
Honest. From a streaming perspective, we got like Teddy Bridgewater. You can maybe talk yourself into Jimmy Garoppolo this week from a matchup perspective, but he's going to be without his best option in Deebo Samuel. I don't know, like Taylor Heineke. If you really want to like shrug your shoulders and say like Heineke can maybe scramble for a few yards here or there. So it's just overall the quarterback landscape isn't really one that lends itself to at least saying, well, this guy is your top option, and then don't even worry about anybody else. So with Hill actually offering the highest floor, I can honestly see it. So it's at the very least a defensible position to take. It's just that we haven't seen it in, what has it been, like 5-6 weeks since it's really seen like Hill as a starter. So I can understand why folks have some trepidation in doing it.
He had good games against Atlanta. There was the game against Denver, which wasn't even really a game. Kendall Hinton started.
Oh, yeah.
By the way, I think that Hinton is ahead of Drew Lock on the quarterback depth chart in Denver.
He should
right? A jugs machine should be. Yeah. And then you had that game against Philadelphia, actually, where the Eagles beat the Saints, beat Taysom Hill. He's still pretty good for fantasy. But you also have the Taysom Hill changeup. Teams aren't going to be very well prepared for the Taysom Hill offense. Like you said, he is a deep passer, and they do at least have, well, I guess Deontay Harris has potentially that 3-game suspension that he's appealing right now, but they have some downfield receivers that they can set up with the running game. And this is something that really just emerged. What's great about doing as many shows and creating as much content as we do every week, as I do every week, is that sometimes, Chris, just simply by osmosis, simply by just having this stuff wash over you, the patterns start to emerge. Or maybe a very rigorous analytical mind like yours, Chris, will tell me, like, no, you're looking for a pattern, doing that human being thing where you're looking for a pattern, but there's not actually a pattern there. But it sure seems like a lot of these teams, these offenses that have redefined themselves, created a new identity around the running game and around that expression of physical will in the trenches are surging, right? It was Philadelphia until last week. Washington sure seems like they've done it. Buffalo probably needs to do a little more of it. Cincinnati, close to your heart, the Bengals are doing it. It's something, and it's also a question of cold weather football, right? I mean, there are these canards, there are these cliches. There's cold weather football. It's time to separate the men from the boys and things like that. But it's real. But it's really a thing. So I guess, and by the way, I loved your face when you were talking about the streaming options this week. Woo! Yeah, it was like your room needed some ventilation from something that you were smelling, because you're right. There's not much out there right now for streaming quarterbacks. So Taysom Hill could be a savior for the team that have been streaming and haven't found anybody. But when we talk about these teams, and again, potentially as a transformational moment for the Saints offense, and they're still in the playoff hunt, by the way. There's very few teams that are out of the playoff hunt in the NFC at this point.
Yeah.
Seattle. See, basically, like the line starts with Seattle and Detroit.
Yeah.
That's it. Everybody else is still alive. So maybe that could be the spark for the Saints. But when we look at these teams, because one of the things I've been fond of saying, and I say it every year, but this year it seems especially apt, Chris, is just tear up these year-to-date stats in week 13. Because they don't give you an accurate picture of the team. Give me the trailing 4 weeks or the trailing 6 weeks, but not the whole 12 weeks. So when we talk about this, how these teams redefine themselves, create new identities, and otherwise it can make year-to-date stats seem deceptive. What's a team that comes to mind? What's a player that comes to mind, or an aspect of an offense that comes to mind that you think we might be behind the curve if we're looking at the whole year because there's something new to consider?
Well, I don't even know if there's one team that really fits that, because we've seen a number of teams have essentially, what's the best way to describe it? Like seasons within a season.
Yeah.
Right? Like where it's just they're weathering the storm, whether it be due to injuries, a la Baltimore, Dallas, the Rams. I mean, there's so many of those teams that have now had to, I guess, redefine themselves based off of the personnel that they've lost, or hoping that they get back at some point, or even just trying to get out of the low efficiency ruts that we start to see them have as well, like whether it be the Bengals, so on and so forth. But I do think like one of the teams that do stick out as a team that just could be one of those teams. I'm hoping that could be the case. Like are my Bengals, since I do live about an hour or so away from Cincinnati. Lived there for about like 5-6 years. But I'm hoping that that's the case, just because they do kind of exemplify one of those teams that has tried to figure out, okay, well, how can we continue to evolve or continue to make this team a bit better so that we're not just a one punch like type of thing, because that was essentially what they were for about 3, 4, 5 weeks, where we were all talking about that Chase to Burrow connection. That was from about weeks like 3 to 7 before the wheels started to really fall off, where it was just every week it was a 50-yard bomb to Jamar Chase, or just that deep shot that could wind up turning into a touchdown. And that was great to see. But it was after that connection started to get short-circuited, especially after their loss to the Jets, and then they get curb stomped like right before they go into their bye. It's just they needed to have something else a part of their offense. They needed to have, and the way that I kind of characterized it as, they had this great haymaker in that connection, that deep shot to Jamar Chase, but they needed a bunch of jabs. They needed to be able to generate those short or quick passes, or even just like some other form of offense, so they can continue to move the ball down the field. Now, whether that comes through Joe Mixon, which we just saw this past weekend, or even just including more of Tyler Boyd or more of T. Higgins, I mean, all of that stuff needed to be a larger part of that offense. And we really saw that come to fruition this past week against Pittsburgh. Sorry to see that happen to your team.
No.
It had to happen at some point.
I confided in you that I was actually rooting for the.
I know. I didn't want to put you on blast.
I'm going to get exercise. I'm going to get ostracized from Steelers Nation for that.
Right. But I mean, that's the part of the thing that needed to happen. But on top of that, there were just little wrinkles about what the Bengals had done, because for so long, part of their issue had been their pass protection and seeing Burrow get roughed up every now and again. But they moved to a 7-man front this past week, and then you start to see little bits and pieces of, Joe Mixon just completely tearing up like down either the left or right side of that offensive line. I mean, right now, they are 9th in rush EPA. I mean, this is a team that has been, for at least like past 4 or 5 seasons, been bottom 10, bottom 12 in the league in efficiency from a rushing perspective. And now you see Joe Mixon having back-to-back like 100-yard gains. He's scored a rushing touchdown in 4 straight, if I'm remembering correctly. So it's like seeing so much of that production on top of the fact that he's connecting with T. Higgins, who had a 27% like air yard share over the past month or so. Finally seeing that happen as well. Seeing Tyler Boyd out there making diving catches along the left side of the field and also making just critical blocks, especially the one that was to Jamar Chase on the left sideline as well. And seeing him also being more incorporated in that offense. It's just those parts and pieces now give them that extra element that, like good teams wind up actually having. Like we think of the good teams from the beginning of the season, whether it's the Rams, whether it's the Cardinals, whether it's like those like the teams that we consider to be elite through the 6-7 weeks of the season. At this point, what's the wrinkle for the Rams? Like what are they going to do? How are they going to evolve in order to come back to what we thought of them at the beginning of the season? Because those high-low or sail concepts that they were using in order to get Cooper Kupp out in space and have him just run down the field, those weren't working as much as they were, especially when we saw it this past week. And then the same thing for teams like, let's say, Green Bay to some degree. I mean, they're starting to look a little bit better, but even when Aaron Rodgers came back, they started to look a little bit off. So it's just there are teams where, again, seasons within a season where teams have to figure out, okay, what can we do well? And if teams now start to figure that out or limit that, how do we start to change our offense in order to continue to compete? Same thing with the Bills, having that less efficiency on offense from a passing perspective. If Josh Allen is incapable of being as efficient on first downs, where their pass rate over expectation is so high that they're continuing to use their wide receivers as just essentially the primary parts of their offense. But if that's not connecting, if Josh Allen isn't able to hit Emmanuel Sanders on first or second down, how are they going to evolve? And we've seen over the past couple of weeks that introduction of, well, now we can use Matt Breida. We can use him in the passing game. He's also an efficient runner. Devin Singletary as well. So you start to, again, those elements are there, but it's just teams having to have not just I guess hubris is probably the wrong term, but just being able to self-scout, wind up figuring out like what they can do better in order to improve their offense. And then that's where that season starts to shift. And then they actually start to play a little bit better. And I think that's what teams need to realize. And we as fantasy managers need to do the same, because we can't always rely on teams to continue to produce in the way that they have so far. But I think so far, I mean, just trying to figure out where we at in like for each team or for each fantasy asset that we rely on a week-to-week basis, and where they at in their season, within a season, that sort of thing.
Yes. Well, and it's great, like from a linguistic standpoint, Chris, because I think that instead of hubris, and in this case, I would say specifically it's excessive pride based on past accomplishments. I don't care what you've done. What are you going to do today? Yeah. You go to humility. And humility is when something's not working, you don't point fingers, you don't blame, you don't disagree with reality. You just learn from reality. And you become flexible. And the teams that have been flexible have been the teams that are flourishing. I thought it was beautiful last week when Tampa Bay and Indianapolis both went against tendency and both let the defense lead the dance. Okay, this is what you're going to take away. Then this is how we're going to counter that. And I'm here for the boxing metaphors about football. And I think setting it up as deep shots or jabs or otherwise thinking about the way a boxer sets up knockout punches by creating tendencies or the appearance of tendencies and then crossing up the opponent. And I think you also can look at the way that pitchers in baseball sequence their pitches, and you have to face a batter like 3 times. Isn't it interesting, by the way, in baseball that now they're like, we don't want to see any batter to see a pitcher more than 3 times in a game. It's interesting how they're figuring this stuff out. I wonder if that kind of analytics is going to come to football eventually, where they're just going to understand and like break things out into more meaningful separations to understand that if you, again, the more you throw all the numbers in one big bucket, whether it's all the numbers from 2021 or all the numbers from all running backs or all teams that face a certain defense, the less meaning you can get out of those numbers. So one of the other things I want to touch on that you mentioned is the season within a season, right? And Chris, I always think of it like the classical forms of art, right? Like a play or an opera or a symphony, like different acts. Right. This is why the classical music works so well for old NFL films, because it is that epic of a scale of the emotional and physical turns that a game can take. And then you span out to a season. Absolutely. These teams are having seasons within seasons. And now you feel the gears, the plate tectonics as we enter another one. And again, that common theme is teams being comfortable with the run. Swaggy in the chat room was talking about the Colts are another team that has really become defined by the run. Although again, last week when you saw Tampa Bay taking away Jonathan Taylor, Carson Wentz was able to counterpunch. And then at the end, when Tampa's defense was worn down, you go back to Jonathan Taylor and really just, the clock kind of ran out on them in that one. It would be a real shame if the Colts don't make the playoffs, because if they can make the playoffs, they can run the table.
Right.
And
I think there's at least a decent chance for it. But at the very least, you could look at the Colts season as somewhat of a success, because coming into the season, almost Frank Reich was vilified as the guy, like, well, what are you doing taking over or taking in this broken quarterback in Carson Wentz that could barely make it out of Philadelphia? And what they come into this season, he has 2 busted ankles within the first couple of weeks. And T.Y. Hilton, we didn't even know if he was going to return, could have been a career ender. So we're relying on sophomore receiver and Michael Pittman. We've got Jonathan Taylor, Nyheim Hines, and an old tight end in Jack Doyle. And that's what we got. And they're making this march towards the playoffs, where at the very least, I mean, most folks had more bets on the Jaguars being the ones to wind up taking over that division. So no, I think that's true. And then from a season within a season perspective, I want to say that the analogy or the image that comes to mind when I try and think about how we as fantasy analysts, or even just folks that try and are spectators of this game that we love to watch like 3 days out of the week, is just that image from either like old sitcoms or cartoons of somebody trying to like pack a suitcase, and where they just keep trying to, like, they add clothes and they add stuff in and they shove it down. And like the suitcase is the structure that we try and like put on football, or just like, fantasy football in general. But like the NFL with its variance and its chaos and like injuries, COVID, like whatever the case may be, I mean, they're the clothes that just keep spilling out the sides. And we can't always, like, especially on a week-to-week basis, we never know what's going to happen. It could be Jonathan Taylor going for 5 touchdowns, and the very next week it could be Leonard Fournette going for 4 touchdowns as Tom Brady tries to connect with, and really none of the receivers from Tampa Bay wind up being the ones that are the fantasy darlings, like for that particular week. It's just on a week-to-week basis, teams are having to redefine themselves. So if teams are doing that, if teams are redefining how they're going to win or be successful on a week-to-week basis, we should also, as fantasy managers, as fantasy analysts, at least start to, I guess, expect or anticipate the change in expectations for each of our fantasy players as well, right? I mean, outside of, let's say, the top end guys like the Devontae Adams of the world, the Cooper Kupps of the world, I mean, even like Derrick Henry, like if he were healthy. I mean, those types of players, we would expect that type of opportunity and that type of workload to be there for them. But any of the other guys, I mean, who knows on a week-to-week basis? It could be Michael Pittman is the one that's carrying you to a fantasy win on a week-to-week basis. And then the very next week, Nyheim Hines takes one reception to the house like he did, like 3 or 4 weeks ago in a primetime game. I mean, that's the type of thing that we should at least anticipate, or at least think about in terms of the range of outcomes, instead of saying, well, I mean, for the past 8 weeks, it's been nothing but Deebo Samuel and maybe George Kittle. There's no way that Brandon Ayuk could wind up being a relevant fantasy asset, or Elijah Mitchell. Well, he's been doing so well. I mean, that's going to continue to be the case. I think that should be the case for Elijah Mitchell, but it's just thinking about those things as teams start to redefine themselves. We should also anticipate that, or at least start to look at how that could change our outlook for fantasy players as the year marches on.
Yeah, and I think that what we're looking at, Chris, is I would say a proposition like, let's be more surprised when things stay the same than when they change, right? Instead of expecting the status quo. Even that phrase status quo has this weight to it. Dum, 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 dum. Right. You say status quo, it's just like, bro, it's like when a field goal hits the upright, like it resonates. Because you think, well, status quo, inertia. Things are going to stay the same unless there's some force to overcome that friction to move it. But now we can see that it's constantly in motion, and really it's more the force to slow it down and keep it constant that we're not seeing. And again, it's that copycat league, it's that pendulum. I know Pat Doherty, I think, jokingly throw out there, like, is this just because of the oversaturation of the pass? And we really did get to peak, well, pass is a more efficient play. Because remember, it used to be that offenses were at least 50-50, if not truly run heavy.
Mm-hmm.
And now a run heavy offense is one that runs what, Chris, 45% of the time,
Yeah,
even
pretty
40% of the time. So maybe this is a natural pendulum effect, and all of these teams are finding success going back to the run because defenses have been built and have the philosophy and have been coached to stop the pass.
That makes sense. I mean, that makes sense to some degree.
Well, on a 30,000 foot level. And you can even see on the micro level, like Swag was bringing up in the chat room, like Sean McVay. All of the success of Sean McVay in LA was based on the run.
Right. Todd Gurley.
It was all based on the run. And now they've gotten away from that. And then you mentioned the Packers, and it makes me think of AJ Dillon.
Yeah.
We all raked them over the coals for taking AJ Dillon in the second round when they were coming off of an NFC title loss, and they didn't really need him because they have Aaron Jones. But now in this 2021 NFL, AJ Dillon sure seems like what the punch you lead with, right? And the punch that really you think your opponent doesn't have an answer for. So these are all interesting things. And then you mentioned that variance from week to week, and I keep coming back to chess and checkmate for some reason. And why I think about that, Chris, is because what we're seeing is week to week, the chess between the coaches, one coach can see a vulnerability and checkmate their opponent. And then the next week, that same quality that allowed them to see that allows them to be checkmated by their opponent, right? We see these wild swings where Jacksonville can shut down Buffalo, and then the Jets are powerless to do anything to stop them, right? And it just swings back and forth and back and forth. And it's not even based on the quality, the overall quality of the coaches or players. It's their ability to see the intention of the opponent and thwart them, and then even furthermore, adjust within a game, right?
Yeah.
Bill Belichick. See, this isn't working, and we have to do something right now, even if we haven't practiced it, right? That's how Belichick beat McVay in the Super Bowl. McDaniels, by running an offense at the end that they hadn't even really practiced. A spread offense with 2 tight ends and 2 running backs totally makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
So let's bring this all back around to stuff that's happening right now. We had 2 big running back injuries this week. So let's start with Carolina. They're going in on bye. Cam Newton's a mess. The team, this just feels like it's like they've had the compressed version of throwing a whole bunch of resources at a rebuild and then ending up back where you started, basically. Is there any, DJ Moore, I guess, is someone we should think about. Cam Newton, I guess. Cam Newton can also affect the backfield outlook. This team's going into a bye, so you might even say just leave it on the side of the road dead for someone else to pick at the carcass. What's our take? What's the smart reaction in fantasy leagues to the Christian McCaffrey injury?
I would say the smart take is, unless you have a guy that, or at least a player that should at least see the majority of those touches, even if the quality of those touches might be, let's say, not so great, especially coming from a passer like Cam Newton, who really showed, there's historical lows. On Sunday, I do think that it's difficult to really try and invest in any of their fantasy assets moving forward. This was a team that just 2 weeks ago, everybody was talking about having the possibility of them getting back to where they're at the beginning of the season when Sam Darnold was there. And then we just see them get completely dismantled the week afterwards. And now that they get the bye week, they get a chance to maybe do some soul searching or figure out how they're supposed to, I guess, even level the ship or even get it back to not sinking at this point.
Right.
They get Atlanta coming out of the bye, which is at least that gives you some sort of respite. But then they get Buffalo and Tampa Bay immediately afterwards, and then New Orleans in week 17. So where's our confidence and where's their confidence going to be at if they have to take on such tough defenses at the back end of the season? So outside of that week 14 matchup, when they come out of the bye, we might see at least a little bit more of an offensive push or offensive production from them. But I'm relying on DJ Moore. The split between, Amir Abdullah and Chuba Hubbard.
Right.
After already seeing that after Christian McCaffrey went out last week on Sunday, and then I'm not expecting much out of either of them. Of course they're fine, they're fine bench stashes because at this point, and from a season long perspective, a lot of folks are probably trying to glom onto any running back.
Right.
Going to be
Kenny Nwangwu,
Jamal Williams. If either Dontrell Hilliard or Donta Foreman might be available. Folks will probably want to try and pick them up after both of them like hit the century mark against the Patriots, even though a couple of them were kind of fluky. There was like a draw play. I forget which one.
It was one of the flukiest plays I've ever seen. I'm going to say it again, Chris, because it was what happened was, and the football gods are fickle and the fantasy gods are especially fickle. So if you lost on the Dontrell Hilliard touchdown, just know this: if you didn't get to see it, it was like minute left and 30 seconds left in the first half, and they're like, "Whoa, we're going to try to do something." Tannehill almost throws a pick. Kyle Van Noy skies for it, almost throws a pick. So the Titans are like, "Oh, let's just concede. Let's just hand the ball off, get tackled, and go to the locker room on a 3rd and 3 draw to Dontrell Hilliard," and he takes off for a 68-yard touchdown. It was because I think the Patriots' minds were already in the locker room. They're like, "Well, we got this."
So it seems folks might look at that box score and just say, yeah, I'm going to pick up either one of those guys because look at them. They just both of them wound up having 100 yards against the Patriots. But now if you wind up watching that game, I mean, that was just the flukiest or stat pattiest, I'm going to make up a word, of plays that possible. But still, if they're getting touches, especially in an offense that is predicated on the run, I mean, at this point, we're just trying to find opportunity. So I can understand why folks would want to pick up Chuba or Amir Abdullah, but think about the quality of touches that those guys are going to be having on an offense that has one of the worst offensive lines in the league so far. After seeing Cam Newton beat up for 3/4 of the game, you immediately see PJ Walker come in. He gets sacked like 3-4 times and also throws an interception immediately after that. So again, opportunity, I know, is king for most running backs, but again, the quality of that offense at this point doesn't give me any sort of confidence that this is going to be a team, or at least the personnel that you would want outside of DJ Moore. That's about it.
Yeah, I had to play it by the book. You know, Chris, I do our waiver wire report every week. And I had to play it by the book and put Hubbard high. And Amir Abdullah actually may end up being a better pickup than Hubbard, especially, you know, when we look at the Tampa and Buffalo games you mentioned. I'll probably project Amir Abdullah higher in those games anyway.
Yeah,
just because of the game scripts. It's game script dependent, right? We saw Chuba Hubbard get in against Dallas, and we basically played for a half. But then when the game was close in a back and forth game, Chuba Hubbard got over 20 touches. So we'll see. Amir Abdullah, I think, is who may flourish when they're playing from behind. But really, when you look over the waiver wire, and I had to play it by the book and put Hubbard high, but some of the names, Chris, even just speculative backups, like Samaje Perine, like a potential 3 down backup, a backup who can play 3 downs in a team that is now committed to the run, right? Like you mentioned, and I want to touch on this really quick since we're going back to that real quick. Certain offensive lines, like maybe if you ask them to run block more than pass block, you're going to get better play. I mean, I think every offensive lineman would rather run block than pass block, right? And then when you have a defense on their heels like that, then when you go to the pass, especially off of play action, then they're not pinning their ears back. They're not coming after the quarterback. And it just makes sense. So that is the mode of the Bengals right now. I wonder if Samaje Perine has a much better chance of affecting your season than either one of these Panthers backs.
It's entirely possible. Yeah.
I'll tell you another name that I'm real fascinated with. You know, sometimes there's like secret messages fit. They're woven into the shows, right? So the folks that if you just read the waiver wire column, this guy was a 3 to 5% pickup because I don't know what to do with him right now. But as we talked through it on the show, Chris, I thought, you know, who's maybe the most attractive, or instead of saying the most attractive, let's put Alexander Mattison aside.
Okay.
But the player on the waiver wire this week at running back who actually has the best chance of being a league winner, Jordan Howard.
Hey, okay.
Because I mean, he's kind of an afterthought pickup because I don't know if he's healthy. But otherwise, I feel like everything is set up for him. When I say the name Jordan Howard, what do you think?
I think that at the very least, he provides enough from an opportunity standpoint that moving forward, especially with the way that Philadelphia is running right now, I think since week 7, they've had a negative pass rate over expectation. So that's like 6 straight weeks of them essentially relying on their running game, and especially after this past week. I mean, my goodness. I mean, Jalen Hurts, for as much love as I have for Jalen Hurts, and actually Adam Wilde and I, since this is a shameless plug, since we do the Dynasty newsletter, go and check that out like every Monday night, Adam Wilde and I, or it releases Tuesday mornings. But we talked about Jalen Hurts and just the decision-making from Hurts. It was just bad on Sunday. I'm hoping that he's done enough and at least put up enough goodwill within the Eagles front office that they'll still want to build around him after this season. But regardless, I mean, looking at what Miles Sanders getting hurt, Boston Scott essentially still just being Boston Scott, but Jordan Howard and the way he's been used, and also looking at their upcoming schedule, like who do they have like moving forward? So
the whole division basically.
Yeah, they got the Jets so this week, then they have their bye, and then Washington twice in weeks 15 and 17, then the Giants. So it's like all matchups that at the very least from a running back perspective, I mean, Washington's defense has started to tighten up a little bit, at least on their front, but I think there's enough there that they can continue. I mean, Jalen Hurts can move the ball against Washington. I mean, we just saw like the corpse of Russell Wilson.
He could move the ball against the Giants. He just kept throwing picks in the red zone, or they kept fumbling. Yeah,
and that's the problem. So I think Jordan Howard sets up as one of those guys that he could at the very least fall into the end zone a couple of times over the next like few weeks. So yeah, he offers up enough upside that I think while it might look gross, and with the way the Eagles have been playing the past couple of weeks, it might be just one of those guys that you put on your roster. Don't watch the game. Don't even try and get like social media updates about the game. Just check the box score later on in the day, and it'll just be like 12, 13 points sitting there waiting for you. Like after everything's all said and done, it's entirely possible. Yeah. The other guy that I would want to say, just alongside Jordan Howard, what about Sony Michel?
Okay, yeah, and they're talking about it in the chat room, and it's Daryl Henderson in the quad strain, and Allah Samaje Perine and Jordan Howard. It's not going to be pretty with Sony Michel, but he's going to run downhill stubbornly. And really, the question is, will the Rams embrace the run? Right, going back to that question, will Rams embrace the run, because they haven't been doing that. Jordan Howard is on a team that has embraced the run, and as you laid out, Washington and the Giants aren't running away from anybody. So if you go into a game wanting to run the ball 40 times, which the Eagles want to do, you're probably going to get to run the ball 40 times against the Giants and the football team, right? Yeah. So that sets up for Jordan Howard. So it's just a question of Sean McVay maybe doing some soul searching, and it is Jacksonville. So maybe a game that's kind of like an extended practice. I say that and watch Jacksonville pull off some upset or something. The Jalen Ramsey Bowl. But, so yeah, I mean, I had to move. I went back today and moved Sony Michel up in my waiver wire rankings because of the Daryl Henderson quad strain news. Now we just need Sean McVay to cooperate, and then we might have something. But I think you're right to be thinking of any backup running back. So I always talk about these criteria, but I think it helps lead us to the running backs because you want to check as many boxes as possible. A good situation, a good talent, potential opportunity in terms of, with Daryl Henderson, it's the injury, right? Yeah. With Jordan Howard, it's Miles Sanders is hurt, and Boston Scott fumbled at a key moment last week, and Miles Sanders fumbled at a key moment, and it looked like Jordan Howard took over for him until he got hurt. Yeah. So, what's the likelihood of opportunity for these guys? And you should be thinking of every backup running back this way and cycling out the bottom of your bench, even if you don't need a running back. And this is where guys like Jordan Howard come in because you're playing keep away. You just don't want that potential to turn into reality on someone else's bench. You just keep them marooned on your bench. That's fine. That's even, like you said, a Dontrell Hilliard pickup, even though Jeremy McNichols could be back after the bye. Hilliard has still done enough that maybe it's him. Maybe it's Kenny Nwangwu, as we mentioned. Madison could come in and get hurt right away. Yeah, we saw Dearness Johnson do it as a third string back in that Stefanski system, and it's just a good practice to keep cycling through that. And if you can only pick up one, then it depends on whether you need touches and you maybe need somebody right away. And how many times, Chris? I'm going to put this out there as a PSA for the contending teams out there. How many times in week 13 have you looked at your running back core and you've got like 4 or 5 guys? Like, I'm fine, I'm set. Yeah, and then come week 15, you have one. Maybe a half. Yeah. So be deliberate, folks. Make sure to cross your T's, dot your I's, and really you should only be carrying the minimum backups, I think, at other positions. I'm even okay with, if your waiver wire stays open in the playoffs, using the waiver wire as your backup quarterback, although as we mentioned at the top of the show, maybe there's not much there. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about Baltimore. It's coming up in the chat room right now. Paramar asks Taysom Hill or Lamar this week. Lamar is going to face Pittsburgh, but TJ Watt is on the COVID. Well, I already said it once. Yeah. Cecil says they'll demonetize us. I don't know. I hope it's not that. I hope everybody's safe out there, by the way. No, yes. I just love our people, and I want them all to stay around with us for as long as possible. So everybody be safe out there as our risk matrix might be changing. And he also, Swaggy said he's going to stubbornly hold Lamar. Steelers have given Lamar trouble. I think the Steelers, even when they were a terrible team last year, gave Lamar trouble, I think because they forced the issue with him on defense. They make him make decisions quickly. So that's a good question, Lamar or Taysom Hill, but we don't have to take that. We can save that for Sunday morning, right, Chris?
Yeah, we'll talk about it then.
But what about the Baltimore offense that we've known so much for running? What are we going to know them for down the stretch?
I think we're going to know them for at least being more of a balanced offense, like moving forward, because we've seen at least the highs from Lamar as a passer. And I do agree that just him coming off of being sick, which that's probably a whole other conversation about why he's sick so often, which makes no sense to me. But seeing him at least be able to continue to be at least league average in terms of pass rate over expectation, but off as a passer this last week with the 4 interceptions. But at the very least, knowing, with TJ Watt likely going to be out, and the matchup itself, I think, provides enough, seeing what the Pittsburgh's defense was unable to do from a run defense perspective. I think that Lamar, Devonta Freeman as well. I mean, being able to be like one of the better 2 pieces of that offense that you'd want to start. But then on the back end of that, I mean, with also seeing the things that Cincinnati was capable of doing against Pittsburgh just this past week. I mean, we saw not just the deep shots to T. Higgins, which you could almost immediately port over and see either Jamar Chase or T. Higgins doing. I mean, or Marquise Brown doing, but also the intermediate stuff. Rashad Bateman could be what Tyler Boyd was last week. I mean, so there's different ways that I think the Baltimore's passing game can wind up overcoming the Pittsburgh's defense at this point, but it all intersects at Lamar. And my expectation would be that with him having at least a week to get a bit healthier, that this should be at least the Baltimore offense that we saw a few weeks ago versus what we saw on Sunday.
Yeah, I would think, and Devonta Freeman's putting together a really nice career revival. And speaking of operas and plays, another act to his career, and he's been outstanding. So absolutely, he had a really good fantasy game 2 weeks ago, and I think that makes a lot of sense. The Steelers' defense is just, remember when we thought, well, the Steelers stopped the run first and foremost.
Not anymore.
Not so much anymore. Yeah. And I do think that it would be prudent at this point. The Ravens are the number 1 seed in the AFC right now.
I know.
They haven't looked like a number 1 seed at any point this year. But they are the number 1 seed. And looking ahead, you want to save Lamar some punishment. So I think you're right to look for more balance there. It's a way to mask the problems they have had on their offensive line at times also.
Yeah.
So it all makes sense, right? I mean, it's the way it's, again, like, you think of it as boxing, Chris, right? Like if you have trouble blocking, if you have trouble keeping your opponent from landing punches, what do? You just keep him on the defensive.
Yeah.
And as offensive linemen, you think of it as offensive linemen who have trouble blocking, going into that stance and being able to mirror a pass rusher can be just fine if you ask them to just tee off on what's in front of them.
You're right. Yeah.
So, I mean, Quentin Spain, right?
Yeah.
What a great pickup for the Bengals. Okay. We've got just probably about 10 minutes left. We're going to go a little short because Dave Kluge is doing a Movember. Am I saying that right? Movember podathon.
Okay. Yeah.
So folks, stick around for that. That's going to start in about 15 minutes, but let's go off the rails as it's good, Chris, to have a chance to not have to be reacting to the game on Thursday or helping people get their injury updates or start sits or otherwise talking about the few topics we can talk about on Thursday. But also there's always good non-football topics. And I try to do this. I want to do it more regularly. Maybe this is another good podcast episode show series to start. But I like to give folks time to say what's great about where they're from. And it can be where you're living now. But are you like the Dayton, Cincinnati area, born and bred?
No, actually, born overseas. Both my parents are prior military.
Right. You've mentioned this before. Yeah. But now it is definitely your adopted home and one that you have an emotional connection to. So other than the Bengals, or talk about the Bengals if we want, memories of the Bengals, like how you fell in love with the Bengals, but just your relationship with the area, your relationship with Cincinnati. What are the things that glow brightly for you?
I think it's just being able to raise my family here. I mean, I'm 38 years old. I've got a few kids. Actually, my oldest is actually headed off to college next year. So, I mean, it's just we're also in season within another season, like for just my family. And it's just being able to set roots here in the Ohio area and actually just being in an area where football and just what I do now on the side is just a larger part of the culture, because growing up, I didn't really have that. We lived in the like upper parts of California. We lived in Oklahoma, Kansas. I mean, that's where like my dad was stationed, like as we were growing up, being a military family. So actually being in a sports town or even being in like a sports culture just really wasn't something I grew up with. And so until I actually got to undergrad at the University of Cincinnati, that was the first time I'd really been in like a quote unquote like college town, or not college town, or football town, a place where they actually celebrated sports like almost on a regular basis, even though, I mean, at that point, the Bengals were okay. I mean, it was fun, at least, Carson Palmer, Ocho Cinco, TJ Husmanjada. I mean, Chris Henry, rest in peace. I mean, just like there was a lot to be excited about all the way. I mean, just pretty much all the way up until the Kiefer Van Hol house, that whole thing. I mean, you want to talk about a city going silent at one particular moment in time. I remember where I was, and I just remember just everybody just silence, the whole city going silent like afterwards, and it's just one of those things that you start to remember, and then you fall in and out of love with the team, and you have complicated relationships with them as they go through their own seasons of just being inept, the playoff bus, the Jeremy Hill fumble. I mean, just so many things that have happened over the last 20
Pittsburgh
years.
is always somewhere like adjacent to it, right?
Joey Porter I will never. I don't know. I have issues with that whole scenario, but I think now it's just become much more. It's been fun to be a Bengals fan at this point. And in my day job, I'll tell folks kind of what I do on the side and the people that I get to talk to on a regular basis, yourself included. And they're just like, oh, this is what you do. So what do you think about the Bengals, man? Then they'll just, and it becomes exciting. It becomes fun. And I think that's part of the best parts of living in a town where, at least again, the talking about football becomes at least a fun, exciting conversation, even with Steelers fans. A couple of my colleagues, they are Steelers fans, and they, a couple of them are just like, yeah, we're going through some rough times, but we still got all those championships. So
exactly.
And Ben's headed to the Hall of Fame as soon as he finally hangs them up. So it's just there's conversations to be had, which are fun, where beforehand I just didn't have those types of things like growing up. So I think that's one of the best parts of being here. And also, I mean, the other thing that I do on the side, which is home brewing. I mean, that's a large part of the culture around here now. I mean, down in Cincinnati, there are plenty of breweries around here. Same thing in Dayton, but still, I mean, I participate in competitions, head down to Cincinnati as often as I can just to check out what's a larger part of the culture nowadays. So if you're not finding me, talking with you or any of the other folks about fantasy football, that's one of the other things that I do. So it's just fun being here in Southwest Ohio. I mean, there's just a lot going on, and I think the culture is good enough that I'm happy to be raising my family here. So I get a kick out of it for sure.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to find your people and celebrate the things that make you enthusiastic, things that give you joy in life. I do want to say about Cincinnati as an aside before I turn the page to Cincinnati is it was one of the truly great cities of the country. Around the same time as New Orleans. It was one of the most populous, biggest cultural centers. I mean, there's a lot of history there, a lot. I'm sure just in downtown Cincinnati, there's a lot of wonderful old buildings, a lot of stories.
The train station that's down there. Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, it's a great city, and there's a lot. It was a much more prominent on a national scale early in the history of the country than it is now. You mentioned beers real quick, and it's great. The beer thing is just mushrooming everywhere, right? Next time you come down to New Orleans, I've got a few places to show you, but give me one of your bucket list beers, like a beer that or it can be a beer you've already tried, but like if you say, Chris, about beer, tell me a beer that I have to try.
I would say that one of the beers that's just because of the place that I live at, it's not like really that much available, is Pliny the Elder. I'm trying to remember the brewery that winds up making it, and escapes me. But still, that's one of the most infamous beers, like when it comes to just craft culture and whatnot. And I've had the pleasure of having it like a couple of times. My brother, who lives out in Seattle, He knows a few folks that gets it like out his way. So
Right.
I've been able to have it a few times, but it's just not something that I can get. Thank you. I saw it in the chat over there. Russian River.
Russian River. Yeah, I'm looking it up right now.
Yeah, that's one of the ones that it's just, if you can ever get a chance to get out, I hear so much about it, but since I'm all the way out here on the East Coast, it's not as available. But that's one of the ones that it's just, the moment I heard about it, I mean, I had to actually look up a couple of clone recipes. I've actually tried to brew it a couple of times, but like the amount of hops they put in it is just absolutely ridiculous. But still, it's just one of those things where if you do get a chance, like see if you can find it. I've seen folks post online, like Josh Hermsmeyer, I know, since he lives out like closer to the West Coast, like he's gotten his hands on it a couple of times. But between that, like Pliny the Elder, Pliny the Younger, I know they have a variant of that as well. Like those are the ones that I at least if I could ever get my hands on it, I'd probably just like, lord it over everybody. Like, look at what I've got, type of thing. But I haven't been able to find it like anywhere at least in my travels, unless I go all the way out to the West Coast. But that's one that sticks out for sure.
Yeah, it's funny in the beer culture. There's like hoarding, or just there's certain beers that when you get it, you get as much as you can.
Yeah,
and I was just looking it up that it looks like Pliny the Younger. They have a 2-week event around the release of it. In February. So that's awesome. Community, right? Community. Circling back, I want to touch on something I think that your unique experience can flesh out for people, just as we have a couple minutes left, but it is on the couch. Is it military brat? Is that term still okay?
Yeah. I mean, I haven't heard it.
That's the term for like kids that grow up in military families and are more transitory, like what you described. So first, I want you to ask you this. What is something about growing up as a military brat that people don't know about that you think is worth an experience, or something that military brats understand each other, and was like nod of understanding when you grow up that way that maybe folks that haven't grown up that way wouldn't understand?
I would say that the one thing that I always remember growing up, and I think my wife, she's also, both of her parents are prior military. It's just that the amount of structure that you wind up having like as a kid and like growing up throughout there, it just feels like it's different than other kids. I mean, maybe if you just wind up having, just strict parents, or just parents that are that abide by that type of parenting, of course that might be the case for you. But at least for me, it had always been that, this is the way that you dress, this is the way that you act, this is the way that you speak to people, this is all these things. And my parents had preached to me and like kind of drilled into my head like throughout my childhood and all the way on up. I mean, this is how you're supposed to behave, these are the things you're supposed to do. And of course, I mean, with growing up with African-American parents, I mean, what the consequences are, for not following the rules and whatnot. So you grow up in that type of environment. And of course it has its benefits. I mean, I think I'm a fairly well-adjusted adult at this point. Same thing for my 2 siblings. So it's just, that's one of the things that I always remembered, is that you would see other kids, like, you'd be like walking through the store or whatever, and you hear the other kid like, I don't want to do this, or I'm not doing that. And also stuff. I'm just like, you're about to die. Like, that's like, I don't know who thought, why you think that you can act this way. That's not, that ain't it, bro. Like you're not going to make it. And then of course you would have the other parents like, well, you just, calm down. We might get you this, and trying to like reason with him and all that. And I'm like, right. Hit him. Like, dude, that's, but that's the way that at least my childhood growing up. And I always remember that being the thing that, my parents would be the quick ones to kind of snatch us up if we were ever got out of line. But at the same time, we would be the same family that be at an airport whenever my dad had to PCS, or we'd be out at a restaurant or something like that. And folks would walk up and be like, your family just looks so great. Your family, I mean, your kids are just so well behaved. My dad's told us the story a couple of times of a family walking by and, dropping off a couple of bucks for us to get something or whatever afterwards, because we seem so well behaved. And then we'd be like, because we know what happens if we don't, like that, that was always the thing. But with us, with military kids, it's kind of, what can happen, at least. I don't know if that's the same for everybody, but at least that was my experience growing up.
Yeah. And some of it is fear and conditioning. And there's like, again, we're on the couch, so there's psychology and parenting. We talk about this stuff all the time with parenting, right? But it really is the military style rearing really is the classic, like, while the kid is the kid, they're like, I don't know why. Like you said, you look at other kids, and it's funny, your reaction was like, you're crazy, but also you might be a bit envious, or you might feel like, geez. But later on in life, You see the gift is discipline, right? The gift
Yeah.
is, but real quick before we got to ask you this, because this is funny. And again, it is on the couch. Okay. And you can be as honest, or you can even size up the question as you want. We can be brief. What would your parents think of your parenting style?
They would probably say that I'm almost too hard on my kids. It's almost like the opposite. And I remember, I still remember the Bill Cosby skit from however many years ago. This is probably like 70s or something like that, where it's just, Bill Cosby was talking about his parents and like, these are not the same people that I grew up with. These are old people trying to get into heaven at this point. And I almost think about my parents in the same fashion, because I'll get on my kids, for this, that, and the other, leaving their toys out or whatever. And then, of course, my mom's just like, you can let them do this or whatever. I'm just like, I remember when I was this young, and I was at this was never, or she buys them stuff and just like, I never had these things. Like, so who is this person that's in my house and telling me, how to do all these things or whatever? But I think overall, I mean, I know that they're happy with me as, me as a parent, happy with me that our kids are coming up. But it's just like, it's one of those things where it's just, once you get older, your view of the world starts to change. And maybe it's also part of, once you get to that age as well, the anxiety or the way you view things, like that weight is kind of lifted off your shoulders because you're done. Like, both my parents are retired right now. And it's just, you don't have those same problems. You don't have that same view on life as you do when you're 36, 37, and me at 38 years old. So it's just, things start to change. And so that's where it's just, they help you try ease up, as much as possible, and help you see things from a different perspective that you probably wouldn't have at this stage of the game.
Grandparents' privilege, right? Like they've earned the privilege to spoil the kids, right? Or otherwise undermine you or create problems because they're mischievous too. And that's okay. Like you said, the weight has been lifted. They can relax and they can relate to the kids maybe better than we as parents can sometimes, because that weight has been lifted. It takes everything. It takes a village. We love the village that is Football Guys, and everybody in the chat room, everybody showing up. It's wonderful to spend time with you. It's wonderful to spend time with Chris and our whole community. So many things going on. Again, stay tuned. Like in a minute, Dave Kluge's doing a podathon for November, and we've got a lot going on. We'll be back on our live show Thursday, Dynasty Mailbag show, all kinds of great stuff on the YouTube channel. Like, comment, subscribe, all those YouTube things, because we love you and we're happy to spend time with you.